The message came from deep space, a strange anomaly buried in the static of the galaxy. At first, no one paid attention to it. Space was filled with noise, cosmic rays, radiation, and signals from distant stars. But the human race had long known how to listen for things that didn't belong, how to separate the meaningful from the meaningless. And this particular signal did not belong. It had started as a simple static burst, a weak transmission lost in the depths of the void. Nothing remarkable, yet the automated systems aboard the Terran Federation cruiser TFS Revenant had detected something peculiar within the data, a slight irregularity in the cadence of the signal. They didn't know why, but it was enough for the ship's AI to flag it for further analysis. "Captain, you should see this," Lieutenant Ava Ruiz called from the communications console. She wasn't usually one to get excited over data anomalies. That was the job of the engineers, the techs, but something about this one had grabbed her attention. "I think we've got a signal from beyond the rim." Captain Elias Voss, standing at the bridge's center with his arms crossed, glanced over. The ship's large windows gave a clear view of the starry abyss beyond, but Voss's focus was always on the present. Space was cold. Space was empty. It was dangerous to become too enamored with its beauty, especially when there was always the next problem to solve. But this caught his attention. "What's the problem?" he asked, his voice gruff. He knew his crew well enough to know when there was something off in their demeanor. Ruiz didn't respond at first. Her fingers danced over the console, pulling up streams of data, patterns, and algorithms. The hum of the ship's artificial intelligence echoed softly in the background as it ran diagnostic checks. "I don't know if it's a glitch or something serious, sir, but it's definitely not normal. It's human," Ruiz said, her eyes scanning the decoded fragments. "I think we found a distress signal." Voss's expression hardened. The Federation wasn't in the business of charity. The days of exploring the unknown were long behind them. Resources were spread thin, and the Federation had enough problems of its own: wars with rebellious colonies, uprisings within the inner systems, political infighting. But the distress signal was different. For one, it was coming from a system that had been classified as uninhabitable, a place far beyond the reach of any civilized race. It was coming from LX 991, a system with no known life. The Revenant was a deep space tactical cruiser, well-armed, fast, and capable of handling hostile situations. But it wasn't a rescue ship, and the idea of diverting course to respond to an alien plea seemed reckless. But there was something about the message. It spoke of survivors, of genocide, of an empire bent on annihilation. "Are you sure?" Elias asked. "Can we verify the source?" Ruiz shook her head. "There's too much distortion. But the signal is organic, possibly sent by a sentient race. The coordinates are accurate." A pause filled the room. A long one. "What do we know about the system?" Voss asked. "LX 991, no one has ever charted that place." "It's uncharted, Captain," Ruiz replied. "The system isn't on any Federation map, but we've detected a Class Hef planet, LX 991b. It's an arid world, no native life signs, no breathable atmosphere. It's practically a death trap." "It's a wasteland." Voss's tone was cold. "What kind of distress signal are we dealing with?" "The message is strange," Ruiz said, pulling up a visual representation of the transmission. "It's fragmented, broken, but there's a recurring plea for help, a species asking for assistance, using terms like genocide, survivors, and pleas." Voss rubbed his chin, considering. The ship's engines had been humming quietly, keeping the Revenant on its course as the crew went about their duties, but now Voss could feel the weight of decision bearing down on him. The Federation was in no position to answer every cry for help, but humans were different. They always had been. Reckless, proud, and damn stubborn when it came to doing the right thing. Elias Voss wasn't about to let a weak transmission die in space, not when it meant the lives of innocent beings. "Divert course," he ordered. "Prepare the crew for an extended deployment." Ruiz blinked, surprised by the quick decision. We're going to answer this cry for help. We're going to find out who's out there and make sure they know they're not alone." And with that, the Revenant changed course. The starfield around them warped as they accelerated toward the unknown system. The journey to LX 991b took several weeks, with nothing but empty space between the ship and its destination. Voss spent most of his time in the command center, reviewing the transmission logs, trying to make sense of the fragmented message. There was no indication of who or what had sent it, but the cryptic words had haunted him. Survivors. Under attack. Please, help. The thought of another race being wiped out by a more advanced power stirred something in him, a reminder of humanity's own history of survival. Earth had once teetered on the edge of destruction, fighting through wars and plague, against alien forces and even internal collapse. He knew how precious survival was, and he wasn't about to let some alien race disappear without a fight. When they arrived in the LX 901 system, the sight was one of devastation. The planet's surface was scarred, the remains of cities crumbling beneath violent winds and the scorched remains of fires. The atmosphere was a toxic haze streaked with smoke. The Revenant sensors detected no signs of life on the surface. Just the faint pulse of the distress signal, emanating from deep underground. The crew made their descent cautiously, with the ship's shields up and its weapons primed. They didn't know what they would find down there, but they had no intention of going in blind. On the surface, the ruins of the Threxian cities were unlike anything humanity had encountered before. Towering crystalline structures stood like petrified giants, their once glowing surfaces now dull and cracked. Voss and his team stepped out onto the broken landscape, wearing environmental suits to protect themselves from the poisonous air. The terrain was eerily quiet, with only the sound of distant winds howling. They found their way to the coordinates, the entrance to an underground bunker. It had once been a stronghold, but now it looked more like a tomb. Inside they found the survivors. They were not what Voss expected. The Threxians were a species of glowing humanoid beings, their skin like polished crystal, with faint veins of bioluminescence running beneath the surface. They were tall, with elegant features, but their bodies were gaunt, their movements sluggish. The war with the Drax Dominion had taken everything from them: family, cities, hope. Only a few hundred remained, hidden in the depths of their ruined world. The rest had been wiped out, the planet bombarded with devastating weapons. The Threxian leader, an elder named Zakiri, stepped forward to greet the humans. His once bright skin had dulled with age and suffering, and his eyes, pale blue, glowing faintly, looked upon the humans with something Voss had never seen before: hope. "You answered." Zakiri's voice was hoarse, weak. His eyes, however, were full of gratitude, like a man seeing sunlight after years of darkness. "We heard you," Voss replied, his voice as steady as he could make it. "Tell me what happened here. Who did this to you?" "The Drax," Zakiri whispered, his gaze turning dark. "A race from beyond the rim. They came with fire and steel, and we resisted. But we are no match for their power. They sought to eradicate us, our people, our culture, everything we held dear." Voss took a slow breath. The Drax Dominion was notorious for their brutality. There were rumors, whispers in the darker corners of space, that they had wiped out entire civilizations without mercy. The Threxians, it seemed, had become their latest target. "Well, didn't you just leave?" Voss asked. "Why stay and fight?" Zakiri looked at him, his glowing eyes piercing through the shadows of the underground cavern. "We had nowhere to go. We thought we could survive. But now we have nothing." "Not nothing," Voss said, shaking his head. "You've got us." Zakiri's eyes widened slightly. "You." Voss nodded. "We're Deathworlders. We don't give up, and neither should you." With that, the captain turned to his crew. It was clear what they had to do. They had come here to answer a cry for help, but now, it seemed, they were about to change the course of history. They would fight, not just for the Threxians, but for the survival of a species that had never imagined that any history had just begun to shift. The Revenant remained in orbit above LX 991b, casting its long shadow over the ruined world below. Captain Elias Voss stood at the command center, watching the planet's shattered surface on the massive view screen. His thoughts were focused on the Threxians. Fragile, nearly extinct, yet determined to survive. They had asked for help, and in his mind, the only option was to give it to them. "What's the situation down there, Lieutenant Ruiz?" Voss asked, his voice steady but carrying the weight of responsibility. Ruiz's fingers flew over the console, pulling up data from the surface scans. "We've located the remaining Threxian settlement. It's deep underground, beneath what looks like a reinforced bunker. The signal is definitely coming from there." "Is it secure?" Voss asked. Ruiz hesitated for a moment. "The area is a wasteland, sir. No signs of life on the surface, just scorched earth and ruined cities. But the bunker appears intact. I'm getting readings of low-level energy signatures, so it's still functioning." "Just barely." Voss nodded. The Threxians had been pushed to the brink of extinction, their once advanced civilization shattered by the Drax Dominion. But somehow they had held on, hiding beneath the surface, clinging to the hope that someone would find them. Now that hope rested on the shoulders of the Revenant and her crew. "We're going in," Voss said. "Prepare the team full tactical gear, and make sure the landing craft is ready for immediate deployment." "Yes, sir," Ruiz replied, already issuing commands to the crew. As the preparations continued, Voss took a moment to gather his thoughts. He had faced many battles in his career, but this one felt different. It wasn't about the Federation's interests or military strategy. It was about survival, about protecting lives that were on the verge of being wiped out by an enemy that cared nothing for their existence. And the Drax Dominion was not a force to be taken lightly. The Drax were a race of ruthless conquerors, an empire that had spread across the stars through sheer force. They didn't negotiate, they didn't leave survivors, and they didn't care about the lives they destroyed in their wake. The Threxians had been foolish to resist them, but then again, that was the nature of the human spirit. Resistance was in their blood, whether it was against an alien invasion or a corrupt government. Voss's thoughts turned back to the Threxians. The race was humanoid but strikingly different from anything humanity had encountered before. Their crystalline skin shimmered in the dim light of their underground sanctuary, and their bodies glowed faintly with bioluminescence, their veins pulsing like faint stars beneath the surface. They had once been a proud people, masters of technology and culture, but now they were reduced to mere shadows of their former selves. Only a handful of survivors remained, their numbers dwindling with each passing day. The Revenant's landing craft, called the Hawk, deployed from the cruiser's belly and descended through the toxic atmosphere, piercing the cloud cover and approaching the surface. The craft rocked slightly as it broke through the lower atmosphere, but the crew's focus was unwavering. Each of them knew the risks, and each of them had volunteered for the mission. They weren't just soldiers, they were humans. And that meant something. They didn't abandon people no matter how desperate the situation. The team, led by Voss himself, landed in a desolate wasteland. The landscape stretched out before them, an endless sea of cracked earth and broken structures. The sky above was a sickly shade of red, the air thick with the stench of burnt metal and the faint scent of death. It was a world that had seen too much violence, too much destruction. The Threxians had been pushed to the very edge of extinction. Their once great cities now lay in ruin, consumed by the weapons of the Drax Dominion. But somehow they had survived. They had hidden beneath the planet's surface, using their advanced technology to seal themselves away from the destruction above. It was their last hope, and now it was in the hands of humans who had come from a world of chaos and conflict of their own. "Move out," Voss commanded. His voice was firm, the authority of a seasoned leader who had fought in countless campaigns. He led the way, his boots crunching on the dry ground, his rifle slung low across his back. The rest of the team followed, moving in a tight formation, scanning the area for any signs of danger. The entrance to the bunker was hidden beneath a collapsed structure, partially buried in the rubble of what had once been a thriving Threxian city. The team cleared the area, using their tools to dig away the debris. It was slow work, but they had no choice. They couldn't afford to rush. Finally, after what seemed like hours, the entrance was revealed. A massive, reinforced door covered in strange Threxian symbols. Voss studied the markings, his mind working quickly to decipher them. He didn't have time for guesswork. They needed to get inside and find the survivors. The door was sealed tight, but one of the tech specialists on the team quickly deployed a cutting tool. Sparks flew as the machine sliced through the thick metal. It took mere minutes to cut through the outer layer, revealing a control panel on the inside. The team's engineer specialist Kira Lorne quickly worked to interface with the system, her fingers flying over the console. "I've got it," Lorne said, her voice triumphant. "The system's still online, but it's locked down tight. It's going to take a few seconds to bypass the security." Voss nodded, his eyes scanning the horizon. They were in enemy territory, and he knew the Drax could show up at any moment. The last thing they needed was to be caught out in the open. Lorne worked quickly, her concentration unbroken as she hacked into the bunker's security system. "Got it," she said a moment later. "The door's open." With a hiss of hydraulics, the massive doors slid open, revealing the dark, musty interior of the Threxian stronghold. The air inside was stale, but at least it was breathable. The team moved in, rifles at the ready, scanning the shadows for any signs of life or any signs of danger. The interior of the bunker was sparse, its walls lined with strange alien technology. But what caught Voss's attention was the group of Threxian survivors huddled in a corner of the room, their bioluminescent skin casting faint glows in the darkness. They looked like ghosts, pale and thin, their eyes wide with fear and hope. Zakiri, the Threxian elder, was the first to approach them. His pale blue eyes glowed faintly as he stepped forward, his movements slow and deliberate. He didn't say anything at first, just watched as his people looked at the humans who had come to save them. There was a long moment of silence, as if the Threxians were unsure whether to trust these strangers or not. Finally, Zakiri spoke. "You've come," he said, his voice raspy but filled with an emotion Voss couldn't quite place. "You've come to save us." "We've come to help," Voss replied, his voice calm and reassuring. "But there's more to this than just saving you. We need to know everything, the Drax, the attack, everything." Zakiri nodded slowly. "The Drax came in the night," he began. "They swept across our cities, destroying everything. We fought back, but they were too powerful, too many. We couldn't withstand their weapons. Our cities fell. Our people fell. We retreated underground, hoping to survive, but even here they did not leave us alone. They sent their warships, bombarding the surface until it was nothing but ash. And still we survived." Voss listened carefully, his mind racing. The Drax were a nightmare. The Federation had faced them before, but never on this scale. If the Drax had the resources to wipe out an entire species like this, what else were they capable of? How long before they turned their eyes on the humans? "We're going to take you out of here," Voss said, finally breaking the silence. "We'll get you to safety." Zakiri's eyes softened, but his expression remained wary. "Where can we go?" he asked, his voice filled with uncertainty. "Where can we hide from them?" Voss paused for a moment, considering the question. The Federation wasn't exactly in a position to take on the Drax head-to-head, but there were places they could go. Underground systems, remote colonies, anywhere the Drax wouldn't be able to find them easily. "We'll find a place," Voss said, his voice resolute. "We'll make sure you're safe." But as the words left his mouth, a low rumble vibrated through the floor beneath them. Voss's hand instinctively went to the sidearm at his belt. He knew that sound. It was the unmistakable hum of a Drax warship entering the planet's atmosphere. The Drax had found them. The sound of the rumbling grew louder, reverberating through the walls of the Threxian bunker like the distant thunder of a storm. Captain Elias Voss's hand instinctively went to the holster at his side, his fingers tightening around the grip of his sidearm. The Drax had found them. Voss's mind raced. The Threxians, fragile and nearly extinct, were relying on them for protection. The Revenant couldn't afford to wait around, hoping that the Drax might be convinced to leave. No, this was the moment. The Threxians had to escape, and they had to escape now. There was no time for hesitation. "Everyone, get to the transport," Voss barked, his voice low but urgent. "Move, move, move!" His command cut through the stunned silence that had descended over the group, and the crew sprang into action. The Threxians, still frail and unsure, hesitated at first, their luminous eyes flicking nervously between the humans and the dark corridor that led deeper into the bunker. Zakiri, their elder leader, looked at Voss with an expression that was both grateful and fearful. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice strained. "We cannot escape. The Drax will destroy us all." "You can't stay here," Voss said, his voice firm. "We've come for you and we're getting you out. Now." Zakiri didn't argue, but the fear in his eyes was palpable. The Threxian people had been running for so long that hope had become a distant memory. Voss could understand that. He had seen it before. People who had been ground down by war, who had been broken by loss. But humanity had been there too, and they hadn't given up. And now, for the Threxians, it was their turn to learn that survival didn't mean surrender. Voss turned and signaled for his team to move out, scanning the corridors for any signs of threat. The walls were adorned with strange symbols, alien script that was a mystery to him, but none of that mattered now. What mattered was getting to the surface and to the landing craft before the Drax warships arrived. Specialist Lorne, the tech expert, was already at the entrance, bypassing the security systems to unlock the door. She worked quickly, her fingers dancing over the console, eyes darting between the panel and the dark corridor ahead. "Hurry it up," Voss snapped, his heart racing. "I'm on it," Lorne muttered, her brow furrowed in concentration. The door hissed open with a final sigh of mechanical effort, revealing the outside world. A desolate wasteland, where nothing but the wind and the scent of scorched earth filled the air. As the team began to move, Voss checked the skies above. The Revenant was still in orbit, but the Drax ships were incoming. Their sleek, menacing forms appeared in the sky above them like vultures circling a carcass. The battle had already begun. There was no time to waste. The team moved swiftly, covering the distance to the landing craft. Voss could feel the Threxians' eyes on him as they stumbled behind him, their crystalline skin glowing faintly in the dying light. They were weak, exhausted and uncertain, but they were alive. And that was what mattered. The Hawk, the Revenant's landing craft, waited for them, its engines humming with the promise of escape. Voss's team had already boarded and the craft's weapons were primed, ready for whatever the Drax might throw at them. The crew moved with military precision, their bodies trained for combat. But it was the Threxians who seemed to hesitate at the threshold of safety. Zakiri lingered at the door, looking up at the sky, his face contorted in both awe and terror. "We have never been free," he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. "Not in generations. If we leave, will they follow?" "We will fight for you," Voss said, his voice carrying the weight of promise. "You're not alone anymore. The Drax will not take you." Zakiri looked at him, his luminous eyes searching Voss's face as if trying to find something. Hope, maybe, or the faintest trace of truth. Finally, with a sharp breath, the Threxian elder stepped forward and into the landing craft. "Then we will go," he said softly. With that, the doors sealed behind them and the craft's engines roared to life. The Hawk lifted off from the surface of the ruined world, climbing quickly into the sky as the Drax warships descended, their weapons charged and ready. Voss could see them now, like black dots in the sky, impossibly fast and menacing as they closed in on the location of the bunker. "Time to move," Voss said through gritted teeth. "Get us out of here, now." The pilot of the Hawk, Lieutenant Kendra Dre, responded immediately, her hands steady as she piloted the craft through the thick atmosphere and out into open space. The sky around them lit up as the Drax warships began their assault, but the Hawk was fast. Faster than the enemy ships could react. Voss gripped the seat in front of him, watching the stars ahead as the craft broke free of the atmosphere. The planet below was already being bombarded, the surface shaking under the assault. It was clear the Drax were determined to wipe out every last trace of the Threxians. They weren't just trying to conquer, they were committing genocide. "We're clear," Dre said, her voice taut with tension. "We're heading into orbit." Voss glanced back at the Threxians. They were silent, their eyes filled with a mix of exhaustion and disbelief. Zakiri, the elder, sat with his head bowed, his hands clasped together as if in prayer. They had escaped, but at what cost? The Threxians had been nearly wiped out once before, and the Drax were relentless. "We need a plan," Voss said, his voice low. "We're not out of danger yet. The Drax won't stop coming." "We'll go to the Revenant," Dre said, her tone resolute. "We can regroup there, but we'll need to move fast. The Drax are already deploying reinforcements. They won't let us slip away so easily." Voss nodded. The Revenant was still in orbit, waiting for them, its engines powered up and ready for a quick departure. The cruiser was heavily armed, but the Drax warships outnumbered them. They needed to stay ahead of the enemy if they had any hope of surviving. As the Hawk neared the Revenant's docking bay, Voss turned to Zakiri. "Do you have any allies? Anyone who could help us?" Zakiri's eyes glimmered, but there was no light of hope in them now. "The Threxians were alone. We were too proud to ask for help, until it was too late." "Well, we're not alone anymore," Voss said, his voice steady. "And we're not going down without a fight." The landing craft docked with a soft thud, and the crew swiftly disembarked. The Revenant's bridge was already alive with activity, the crew moving with the calm urgency that came with years of military training. Voss immediately took his place at the command center, his hands gripping the armrests of his seat. "Status report," he ordered. "The coordinates into the system."